I forgot to tell my wife I had called a technician to fix the company's security camera. When I accidentally checked the footage, I was horrified to uncover a dark secret about my wife and my male personal assistant. 10 minutes later, the worst happened. So there I was, living what I thought was the American dream. You know, the one they sell you in those glossy brochures with the perfect house, the perfect spouse, and the illusion that everything's under control. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. But on that particular Thursday, I was still blissfully unaware that my life was about to become a reality TV show I never auditioned for. I'm Graham Cole, 38 years old, and co-owner of Harper & Holt Consulting, a mid-sized firm that specialized in making other companies look like they had their crap together. The irony of that wouldn't hit me until later, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. My business partner, Richard Harper, handled most of the client-facing stuff because he had that natural charisma that made people trust him with their money. Me? I was the behind-the-scenes guy, the one who actually made sure the ship didn't sink while everyone else was busy taking Instagram photos on the deck. And then there was Lydia, my wife of 7 years, the woman I'd pledged my eternal devotion to in front of 200 witnesses and an open bar that cost more than my first car. Lydia ran our HR department, which she took very seriously, perhaps a little too seriously, if you ask me. She treated employee conflicts like they were geopolitical crises and somehow managed to turn every staff complaint into a 3-act drama complete with PowerPoint presentations and action items. I used to joke that she should have been a UN negotiator instead of an HR director, but she never found that funny. Lydia didn't find most of my jokes funny, actually, which should have been my first red flag, but hindsight's 2020, right? The office itself was your standard corporate setup. Gray cubicles, motivational posters that nobody actually found motivating, and that one printer on the 3rd floor that jammed every single time you were in a hurry. We had about 45 employees spread across 3 floors of a building in downtown Seattle, and somehow, we'd managed to convince ourselves we were making a difference in the world. The coffee was mediocre, the AC was always either too cold or not cold enough, and Sharon from accounting microwaved fish in the break room at least twice a week, despite the multiple passive-aggressive notes taped to the microwave. This was corporate America in all its beige-colored glory. For the past few weeks, we'd been dealing with a security camera situation that was driving me absolutely insane. The system had crashed during a power surge back in July, and since then, about half our cameras were basically just expensive decorations mounted on the walls. I'd brought it up in 3 separate management meetings, each time suggesting we get them fixed immediately. But Lydia, in her infinite wisdom and her obsession with quarterly budgets, kept pushing it back. "We'll handle it next quarter, Graham," she'd say, waving her hand dismissively like I was suggesting we install a gold-plated fountain in the lobby. "It's not a priority right now. We need to focus on the Henderson account." The Henderson account. I was so sick of hearing about the damn Henderson account. Sure, they were worth about $2 million annually, but I'm pretty sure our building could have been actively on fire and Lydia would have said, "We'll deal with it next quarter, we need to focus on Henderson." So I did what any rational, slightly frustrated husband would do. I went behind her back and fixed the problem myself. I found Victor through a buddy of mine who worked in building security downtown. Victor was this quiet, efficient guy in his 50s who showed up with a toolbox that looked like it could rebuild the International Space Station. He assessed our system in about 20 minutes, gave me a quote that was surprisingly reasonable, and had everything up and running within 2 days. The man was a magician. Every camera was now operational. The feeds were crystal clear. We're talking HD quality that could probably pick up on someone's existential crisis from 50 feet away. And he even upgraded our storage system so we could keep footage for 90 days instead of 30. The funny thing, and by funny I mean the thing that would later make me want to bang my head against every wall in the building, is that I completely forgot to tell Lydia the cameras were fixed. It wasn't intentional, really. I'd been swamped with the Morrison proposal. We'd had that emergency client call about the data breach simulation, and somewhere between answering 87 emails and trying to remember if I'd paid the water bill at home, mentioning the cameras just slipped my mind. Plus, there was a petty part of me, a small, childish part that I'm not particularly proud of, that enjoyed having fixed the problem she kept deprioritizing. I figured I'd casually mention it at some point, maybe drop it into conversation like, "Oh yeah, by the way, Those cameras you said weren't a priority? Fixed them 3 weeks ago. No big deal. That Thursday started like any other. I dragged myself out of bed at 6:15 after hitting snooze twice, shuffled through my morning routine on autopilot, and listened to Lydia complain about how the new intern, some kid named Tyler or Trevor or something equally forgettable, kept formatting his reports wrong. I nodded in all the right places while internally wondering if it was too early to start drinking. We had coffee together in our kitchen that was featured in some home design blog once, which Lydia brought up at every dinner party like it was her greatest achievement. She was wearing this navy blue pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and her perfume, some designer brand I couldn't pronounce, smelled like what I imagined luxury and tax evasion would smell like if they had a scent. Big day today, she said, scrolling through her phone while her coffee went cold. I've got back-to-back meetings until at least 7. Another late night? I asked, trying not to sound as annoyed as I felt. This was becoming a pattern lately. Late nights, weekend, emergencies, urgent calls that she had to take in the other room. But I chalked it up to her being dedicated to her job. Lydia was nothing if not dedicated. Just how it is during performance review season, she replied without looking up. You know how it gets. I did know. Or at least, I thought I did. Performance review season was always hectic. Lots of meetings with employees, documentation, uncomfortable conversations about productivity and goals. It made sense. Everything made sense. That's what I kept telling myself. We drove to work separately. She had some early morning thing with the department heads, and I had to stop by the post office to mail some contracts. When I got to the office around 8:30, she was already deep in conversation with Damien, my personal assistant. Damien was 26, fresh out of business school, and had that eager-to-please energy that made him both useful and occasionally exhausting. He'd been with us for about 8 months, and I'd honestly thought he was doing a decent job. Organized my schedule, handled client calls when I was tied up, remembered everyone's coffee orders, and never once microwaved fish in the break room, which automatically put him in my top 10 favorite employees. Morning, boss, he said with that bright smile of his. Your 9 o'clock, called to reschedule. I moved them to Tuesday at 2. Also, the Patterson files are on your desk, and I updated the Fletcher spreadsheet with the new projections. You're a lifesaver, Damien, I said, meaning it. See, everything was normal. Everything was fine. Lydia kissed me goodbye around 5:30, right there in the lobby where everyone could see, like we were starring in some commercial for successful marriages. Don't wait up, she said. This HR meeting is going to run long. Budget discussions with the senior staff. Want me to bring you dinner? I offered because that's what good husbands do. No, we ordered in. I'll probably be home around 10. She kissed me again, and I caught that perfume smell, luxury and tax evasion, and watched her walk back toward the elevators. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? We'd been married for 7 years. We owned a business together. We had a mortgage and a joint checking account, and one of those fancy coffee makers that does 17 different types of espresso. You don't question someone you've built a life with, especially when they're wearing a pantsuit and carrying a leather portfolio that screams credibility. I left around 6, stopped at the grocery store to grab ingredients for the stir-fry I'd been craving all week, and spent my Thursday evening exactly like I spent most Thursday evenings, cooking dinner for one, catching up on a documentary about financial fraud that felt oddly appropriate in retrospect, and falling asleep on the couch before Lydia got home. It was completely, utterly, perfectly normal. And that's exactly what made what happened next so spectacularly, devastatingly worse. Friday morning rolled around with all the enthusiasm of a DMV appointment, which is to say I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck made entirely of paperwork and regret. Lydia's side of the bed was already empty. She'd apparently gotten up early for some critical HR thing that couldn't wait, which was becoming her favorite excuse lately. I found a post-it note on the bathroom mirror that said, "Meeting ran late. Left early. See you at the office," with a little heart drawn at the bottom. That heart felt about as genuine as a $3 bill. But again, I was still operating under the delusion that my marriage was intact. I got to the office around 7:15, which was early even for me, but I'd slept like garbage and figured I might as well be productive with my insomnia. The building was practically empty. Just me, the security guard who nodded without actually seeing me, and probably Gerald from IT, who I'm pretty sure just lived in the server room at this point. I grabbed my usual coffee from the lobby cafe, a large dark roast that tasted like it had been brewed with the tears of overworked employees, and headed up to my office on the third floor. My office was nothing fancy. Decent view of the parking lot, a desk that I'd inherited from the previous owner, some diplomas on the wall that were supposed to make me look credible, and a bookshelf full of business books I'd bought with every intention of reading but never actually opened. There was a photo of Lydia and me from our wedding on my desk, both of us grinning like idiots who had no idea what the next 7 years would bring. I should have thrown that picture in the trash right then and there, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I settled into my chair, opened my laptop, and started going through the 73 emails that had accumulated since I'd left yesterday. Most of them were the usual corporate nonsense: meeting requests, status updates, someone asking if we could move the quarterly review to Thursday instead of Friday because of scheduling conflicts, which was code for "I don't want to work late on a Friday." I was about to respond to a particularly passive-aggressive email from accounting when I noticed the security camera software icon on my desktop. Now, here's where my morning took a sharp left turn into hell. I hadn't checked the camera feed since Victor installed the new system 3 weeks ago. There'd been no reason to, really. We weren't having security issues. Nobody was stealing staplers or spray painting profanity in the parking garage, and honestly, I'd just forgotten the thing existed. But something made me click on it that morning. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was my subconscious trying to save me from years of therapy bills. Or maybe the universe just decided that Friday was as good a day as any to completely demolish my worldview. The software opened up with a grid of camera feeds, each one showing a different part of the building: lobby, parking garage, second floor hallway, break room where Sharon was probably already microwaving something that smelled like a crime against humanity. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly like it should. And then I saw the timestamp. The system had helpfully bookmarked motion events from the previous evening, because of course it had. Victor's fancy new setup included motion detection software that flagged any activity after hours. There were maybe 15 or 20 clips from last night, mostly cleaning crew, a few people working late, nothing unusual. But one clip caught my eye, timestamped at 8:47 p.m., location tagged as Executive Office 3A. Executive Office 3A was my office. I felt this weird prickle at the back of my neck, that instinctive warning system that evolution gave us to detect predators and bad decisions. My office should have been empty at 8:47 p.m. I'd left at 6. I'd locked the door. I was pretty sure I'd locked the door. Who the hell was in my office at almost 9 o'clock at night? I clicked on the clip with the kind of casual curiosity that you have right before your entire life implodes, like opening an email from the IRS or checking your bank account after a weekend in Vegas. The video loaded, crystal clear HD courtesy of Victor's excellent work, and suddenly I was watching a film I never wanted to see, starring people I thought I knew. There was Lydia, my wife of 7 years, sitting in my office chair. The expensive ergonomic one I'd bought after throwing out my back last year. She was wearing the same navy pantsuit from yesterday, though her jacket was off and draped over the armrest like she'd gotten comfortable. And standing behind her, hands on her shoulders in a way that was definitely not included in his job description, was Damien, my assistant. The kid I'd hired 8 months ago because his resume was impressive and he'd seemed eager and competent. For about 3 seconds, my brain tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe he was giving her a professional shoulder massage because she'd complained about tension. Maybe this was some weird new team-building exercise that HR had implemented. Maybe I was having a stroke and hallucinating the whole thing. But then Lydia tilted her head back and laughed. That same laugh she used when she was genuinely amused. The one I hadn't heard directed at me in about 6 months. And Damien leaned down and whispered something in her ear that made her smile in a way that sent my coffee cup crashing to the floor. "You've got to be kidding me," I said out loud to my empty office, because apparently I'd become the kind of person who narrates their own psychological breakdown. I should have stopped watching right then. Any sane person would have closed the laptop, called a lawyer, and started planning their exit strategy. But I'm not a particularly sane person, especially not at 7:30 in the morning while watching my marriage disintegrate in high definition. So I kept watching like some kind of masochist who'd forgotten how to protect his own mental health. Damien's hands moved from her shoulders down her arms in a way that was unmistakably intimate. Lydia reached up and put her hand over his, her wedding ring, the one I'd spent 3 months' salary on. catching the overhead light like it was mocking me specifically. They weren't discussing quarterly reports or employee retention strategies. This wasn't a late-night work session about budget allocations or performance reviews. This was my wife and my assistant having what could only be described as a hands-on meeting in my office, in my chair, probably breathing my air and definitely destroying my faith in humanity. The video was 4 minutes and 37 seconds long. I know because I watched the timestamp tick by like I was watching a bomb countdown in an action movie, except the bomb was my marriage and the explosion was going to be my emotional stability. At the 2-minute mark, Lydia stood up and Damien pulled her closer, and that's when I hit pause so hard I nearly broke my spacebar. My hands were shaking. My coffee was all over the floor, creating a puddle that looked like a modern art installation titled, "Man Discovers He's an Idiot." My heart was doing this weird thing where it felt like it was simultaneously racing and stopping, like it couldn't decide whether to keep me alive or just give up entirely. Okay, I said to myself, because apparently I was fully committed to the whole talking to myself thing now. Okay, this is fine. This is totally fine. This is just my wife having an affair with my assistant in my office after lying about a late HR meeting. This is extremely fine. The sarcasm was automatic, a defense mechanism my brain deployed when reality became too much to process straight. I rewound the video 10 seconds, purely to confirm I wasn't hallucinating, and immediately regretted it because nope, it was still happening, still real, still the worst thing I'd seen since that time I accidentally walked in on my college roommate doing things that should have required a permit. I sat there in my destroyed coffee puddle of an office, staring at the paused video on my screen, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't sadness yet. That would come later, probably around 3 a.m. for the next 6 months. It wasn't even anger, though that was warming up in the bullpen. It was this cold, clear realization that everything I'd believed about my life for the past 7 years was a carefully constructed lie, and I'd been the only one not in on the joke. The timestamp on the video said 8:47 p.m., Thursday, October 9th, 2025. The timestamp on my watch said 7:33 a.m., Friday, October 10th, 2025. In less than 12 hours, I'd gone from a happily married business owner to a man watching his wife's infidelity in 4K resolution like it was a Netflix documentary I couldn't pause. And the worst part? They had no idea I knew. Lydia was probably in her office right now, planning her day, drinking her overpriced latte, completely unaware that I'd just stumbled onto footage that would make a divorce lawyer weep with joy. I closed the laptop, stood up, and looked at my reflection in the darkened screen. Well, Graham, I said to myself, this is going to be one hell of a Friday. You know that moment in horror movies where the protagonist hears a weird noise in the basement and instead of doing the smart thing, like leaving the house, calling the cops, or literally anything that doesn't involve investigating, they grab a flashlight and walk directly toward their own demise? That's exactly what I did, except my basement was a computer screen and my flashlight was the replay button. I sat back down in my coffee-soaked chair, opened the laptop again, and told myself I was just being thorough. I needed to be absolutely sure of what I'd seen before I did anything drastic, right? That's what rational people do. They gather evidence. They confirm facts. They definitely don't torture themselves by rewatching their wife's betrayal frame by frame like some kind of sadistic film critic, but hey, apparently that's where I was at in my personal development journey. The video was still paused on that moment. Lydia standing, Damien's hands on her waist, both of them frozen in a tableau that belonged in a museum exhibit titled, "Reasons to Never Trust Anyone Ever Again." I took a deep breath that did absolutely nothing to calm me down and hit play. What happened next made the first viewing look like a Disney movie. Damien spun Lydia around to face him, and she had this expression I'd never seen before, or maybe I had, and just hadn't been paying attention. It was this mix of excitement and mischief, like they were teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs instead of two grown adults destroying a marriage in corporate real estate. She said something I couldn't hear because Victor's fancy camera system apparently didn't include audio, which was either a blessing or a curse depending on how much psychological damage I wanted to inflict on myself. Then Damien, my assistant, the guy I'd personally trained, the one I'd given a Christmas bonus to last year, leaned in and kissed my wife. Not a polite peck on the cheek. Not an accidental slip during a professional goodbye. This was a full contact, Olympic-level kiss that suggested they'd had plenty of practice and weren't particularly concerned about getting caught. My stomach lurched like I was on a roller coaster designed by someone who hated humanity. I reached for my coffee and remembered I'd already spilled it, which was probably for the best because I would have absolutely thrown up in it. Okay, that's enough, I muttered, reaching for the mouse to close the window. But my hand hovered there like it was controlled by some masochistic puppet master who thought I hadn't suffered enough. And like an idiot, a complete and total idiot who apparently enjoyed emotional self-harm, I didn't close it. Instead, I maximized the window to full screen because why not get the complete cinematic experience of my life falling apart? The detail was extraordinary, really. Victor had done too good a job. I could see everything. The way Lydia's fingers gripped the back of Damien's neck, the way he pushed her back against my desk, the one I'd eaten lunch at earlier that day. The way her wedding ring glinted in the fluorescent office lighting like it was actively participating in the betrayal. I could even see the motivational poster on the wall behind them, the one that said "Success is a team effort" in big inspirational letters. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were definitely teaming up, just not in the way corporate America intended. I should mention that my office had pretty standard furniture, desk, 2 chairs for clients, a small couch by the window that I used for reading contracts. That couch, I realized with growing horror, was about to become significantly less innocent. Lydia pulled Damien toward it, and that's when I actually said no out loud like I was watching a character in a horror movie make a terrible decision. Except the characters were real and the movie was my life. They sat down on the couch, and I'm not going to describe in detail what happened next because I value what's left of my sanity and also because this isn't that kind of story. Let's just say that the late HR meeting Lydia had mentioned wasn't about budget discussions or employee evaluations. Unless employee evaluation was some kind of euphemism I'd been too faithful to understand, in which case Damien was apparently getting a very thorough performance review. I watched for maybe 30 more seconds, 30 seconds that felt like 30 years, before I finally found the willpower to hit pause again. The timestamp read 8:49 p.m. The video had a total runtime of 4 minutes and 37 seconds, which meant I still had over 2 minutes of footage left. 2 minutes I absolutely did not need to see. Why did I hire Victor? I asked the empty office. Why did he have to be so damn good at his job? Couldn't he have installed cameras that were slightly blurry? Or maybe just pointed at the ceiling? Would that have been so hard? But no. Victor had given us crystal clear HD surveillance with night vision capabilities and motion detection, because the universe apparently thought I needed to see my marriage implode with absolute clarity. Thanks, Victor. Really appreciate the attention to detail, buddy. I minimized the window, then immediately maximized it again like some kind of psychological yo-yo. My brain couldn't decide whether it wanted to see more or pretend the whole thing never happened. The problem was, I couldn't unsee what I'd already seen. That image was burned into my retinas like I'd stared at the sun, except the sun was my wife cheating on me and the warmth was actually the cold, creeping realization that I'd been living a lie. The rational part of my brain, the tiny part that wasn't currently screaming, started making calculations. If this video was from last night at 8:47 p.m., how long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Had every late meeting been code for hooking up with my assistant? How many times had she kissed me goodbye before going off to do this? How many times had Damien looked me in the eye and said, "Yes, sir," and right away, "Boss," while secretly sleeping with my wife? I felt like I was in one of those optical illusion pictures where once you see the hidden image, you can't unsee it, and suddenly every interaction I'd had with both of them for the past 8 months was taking on a whole new, nauseating meaning. That time Lydia suggested I take Damien to the Henderson client meeting because she thought he needed the experience? That time Damien volunteered to help Lydia reorganize the HR files on a Saturday? That time I came back from lunch early and found them both in the break room laughing about something they immediately stopped talking about when I walked in? "You absolute idiot, Graham," I said, and I meant it. All the signs had been there, lit up like a Vegas strip, and I'd been too trusting or too stupid or too busy with quarterly reports to notice. I scrolled back to the beginning of the video, back to that moment when it was just Lydia sitting in my chair looking relaxed and Damien standing behind her. They looked comfortable together, familiar. This wasn't their first time doing this. You don't get that comfortable with someone overnight. This had been going on for a while, and I'd been the oblivious husband working late while they were apparently working each other. The anger was starting to build now, replacing the shock with something hotter and more dangerous. I could feel it rising in my chest like heartburn, except heartburn doesn't make you want to burn down everything you've built over the past 7 years. My hands clenched into fists, and I had this sudden urge to punch something, preferably Damien's face or maybe just a wall, because walls don't require bail money. But underneath the anger was something worse, humiliation. Pure, unfiltered embarrassment at being the guy who didn't know. The sucker. The fool. I was the punchline to a joke everyone else had been in on, and the worst part was, they were probably still laughing. Lydia was probably in her office right now, planning her day, maybe even texting Damien about when they could meet up next, completely unaware that I'd stumbled onto their little production. I checked the motion detection log again. There were more clips from other nights, September 28th, October 2nd, October 5th. They'd been using my office like it was their personal hotel room, and I'd been none the wiser because the cameras were supposedly broken. Lydia had been the one pushing to delay the repairs. Lydia had been the one saying it wasn't a priority. Of course she had. She'd been protecting her affair, making sure there was no evidence. No way for me to accidentally discover what was happening after hours. And it would have worked too, if I hadn't gone behind her back and hired Victor. Thank you, Victor, I whispered to the empty office, and I actually meant it this time. Thank you for being good at your job. Thank you for installing cameras that work. Thank you for accidentally giving me the evidence I'll need to burn this whole thing down. I finally closed the laptop, unable to watch another second. My hands were still shaking, my coffee was still decorating the floor, and somewhere in this building were two people who had no idea their world was about to end. I looked at the clock. 7:52 a.m. In about 8 minutes, people would start arriving for work. Lydia would probably show up around 8:30 with her latte and her lies. Damien would bounce in with his eager smile and his complete lack of shame, and I would have to look at both of them and pretend I didn't know. At least, for now. I spent the next few minutes sitting in my office like a defendant waiting for a verdict, except I was the judge, jury, and executioner all rolled into one extremely caffeinated package. My brain was running through about 17 different scenarios simultaneously. Everything from walking out and never coming back to hiring a skywriter to spell out, "My wife is cheating on me," over downtown Seattle. Neither option seemed particularly productive, but they were definitely more appealing than what I was about to do, which was absolutely nothing. Well, not nothing exactly. I was going to sit here and watch them walk in like everything was normal, like they hadn't spent last night treating my office furniture like props in their own personal soap opera. I was going to smile and nod and pretend I didn't know, because the thing about having nuclear-level evidence is that you don't just casually drop it at 8 in the morning. You wait. You plan. You make sure that when the bomb goes off, the blast radius is exactly what you intended. At least, that's what I told myself while I cleaned up the coffee spill with paper towels from my desk drawer, trying to look like a functioning human being instead of a man whose marriage had just been murdered in high definition. I pulled up my email and attempted to respond to some messages, but every sentence I typed came out wrong. Dear Mr. Patterson, thank you for your inquiry about our Q4 projections, which are looking great unlike my marriage, which is a dumpster fire. Delete. Hi, Janet. Yes, I can attend the budget meeting on Tuesday, assuming I haven't driven my car off a cliff by then. Delete. Good morning, team. Just a reminder that our quarterly review is coming up, and also trust no one because everyone is a lying snake person. Delete, delete, delete. This was going to be harder than I thought. At 8:07, I heard voices in the hallway. Early arrivals, probably the accounting team because they were always weirdly punctual. I straightened my tie, took a breath that did absolutely nothing to steady my nerves, and pulled up a spreadsheet on my computer so I'd look busy and normal and definitely not like someone who'd just discovered his entire life was a carefully orchestrated lie. At 8:23, I heard her laugh. Lydia's laugh carried down the hallway like a warning siren, except instead of alerting me to danger, it was just reminding me that danger was already here and had been sleeping in my bed for 7 years. I gripped the edge of my desk hard enough to leave marks, forced my face into something resembling neutral, and waited. She appeared in my doorway at 8:26, looking exactly like she always did, put together, professional, like a woman who definitely hadn't spent last night doing extremely unprofessional things with my employee. She was wearing a charcoal gray dress today, her hair pulled back in that sleek ponytail she favored for serious meeting days, and carrying her signature leather portfolio that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. "Morning, honey," she said brightly, like we were starring in a commercial for successful marriages and not a true crime documentary. "You're here early. Couldn't sleep?" The audacity. The absolute audacity of this woman to stand in my doorway and call me honey, while the footage of her betrayal was literally saved on my computer maybe 15 feet away from where she was standing. "Oh, you know me," I said, and I was genuinely impressed by how normal my voice sounded. "Just wanted to get a head start on the Patterson proposal. Busy day ahead." "That's my Graham," she said, smiling. "Always so dedicated." Dedicated. Right. I was dedicated. I was so dedicated that I'd stayed late hundreds of nights working on proposals and budgets and client presentations while she was apparently dedicating herself to my assistant. The irony was so thick I could have served it at a dinner party. "How was your meeting last night?" I asked, because apparently I was a masochist who enjoyed inflicting psychological damage on myself. "You said it ran late?" "Oh God, it was exhausting," she said, and she actually had the nerve to look tired, like lying was such hard work. "We didn't wrap up until almost 10. Budget discussions with the senior staff. You know how Dale gets about allocation numbers. He wanted to debate every line item." Dale. She was blaming Dale, our CFO, who was probably at home last night watching Netflix with his wife like a normal person who didn't use budget meetings as cover stories for affairs. Poor Dale, getting dragged into this narrative without even knowing it. "Sounds rough," I managed. "It was. But hey, that's the job, right?" She checked her watch. "I've got a 9 o'clock with the new hires for orientation. Should be done by 10:30 if you need me for anything." "I'll manage," I said, and that might have been the most honest thing I'd said all morning. She blew me a kiss, an actual kiss, with her hand and everything, and disappeared down the hallway, probably toward her office where she'd spend the next hour doing whatever HR directors do when they're not systematically destroying their marriages. I sat there for exactly 45 seconds, staring at the spot where she'd been standing, wondering if I'd imagined the entire conversation. Maybe I was having some kind of psychotic break. Maybe the video wasn't real. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at my desk, and this was all just an incredibly specific nightmare brought on by too much coffee and not enough therapy. Then Damien walked in, and all those maybes evaporated like my faith in humanity. "Morning, boss," he said with that puppy dog enthusiasm that I'd previously found endearing and now found absolutely enraging. He was wearing khakis and a blue button-down, his hair styled in that deliberately messy way that probably took him 20 minutes to achieve, looking like every generic assistant in every generic office in America. Except generic assistants don't typically sleep with their boss's wife, so Damien was special in the worst possible way. "Morning, Damien," I said, and it took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to follow it up with "you home-wrecking little snake." "Your 9 o'clock rescheduled to next week," he said, checking his tablet like everything was normal. "I moved the Henderson call to 2 p.m., and the Fletcher files are ready for your review. Oh, and Lydia asked me to remind you about the budget meeting on Tuesday. She wants to make sure you've reviewed the Q4 projections before then." Lydia asked him. Of course she did. They were probably coordinating schedules, making sure they had plenty of opportunities to sneak around behind my back. I wondered if they texted each other in some kind of code. Budget meeting probably meant, let's use Graham's office again. Q4 projections probably translated to where that cologne I like. My eye twitched. I felt it twitch, this involuntary spasm that I couldn't control, and I'm pretty sure if I'd had electrodes attached to my head, I could have powered the entire building with the rage currently surging through my nervous system. "Boss, you okay?" Damien asked, and he actually looked concerned, like he cared about my well-being. Like he hadn't spent last night doing things with my wife that definitely violated his employment contract and possibly several commandments. "I'm fine," I said through teeth that were clenched so tight I was surprised they didn't shatter. "Just tired. Didn't sleep well." "Yeah, you look tense," he said, and I swear to God, if I'd been a cartoon character, steam would have been coming out of my ears. "You should take a break. Maybe go for a walk or something. Clear your head." "Clear my head." Excellent advice from the guy who'd been clearing my wife's schedule for extracurricular activities. I'll keep that in mind, I said. He stood there for another moment, probably waiting for additional instructions, or maybe just enjoying the view of a man slowly losing his mind, before adding, "Oh, and Lydia wanted me to grab her some coffee. The good stuff from that place on Fifth. You want anything?" They were getting coffee together. They were coordinating coffee runs. This was a whole operation, a well-oiled machine of deception and betrayal with caffeine breaks built in. "I'm good," I said, gesturing to the empty mug on my desk that still smelled like the coffee I'd spilled all over my floor during my earlier mental breakdown. "Already had some." Cool. I'll be back in like 20 minutes. He started to leave, then turned back with that smile that I now recognized as the smile of someone who was definitely sleeping with my wife. "By the way, boss, I just wanted to say thanks again for giving me this opportunity. Working here has been amazing. You and Lydia have built something really special." Something special. We'd built something special, and he'd been taking it for a test drive without permission. "Glad you're enjoying it, Damien," I said, and the sarcasm in my voice was apparently too subtle for him to detect, because he just grinned and walked out. I watched him disappear down the hallway, probably off to buy my wife her favorite overpriced latte, and I realized something important. I couldn't do this. I couldn't sit here and play normal for another hour, let alone another day. The performance was going to crack, probably in the next 30 minutes, and when it did, I was either going to say something I'd regret or throw my computer through the window. I pulled my phone out and stared at it, trying to decide what to do next. Call a lawyer? Call my business partner Richard and tell him his co-owner's marriage was imploding? Call a therapist and schedule an emergency session to discuss why I kept rewatching footage of my own betrayal? Instead, I opened my email and typed a message to the entire management team with a subject line that read, "Emergency team meeting, 10 a.m., mandatory attendance." If they wanted to play games, fine. But I was about to change the rules, flip the board, and light the whole thing on fire. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. You know what's funny about corporate America? We use meetings to solve everything. Bad quarter? Meeting. Employee conflicts? Meeting. Company restructuring? Meeting. Wife cheating on you with your assistant in your own office? Well, that definitely calls for a meeting. I sent that email at 8:47. Ironic timing considering that was the exact minute Lydia and Damien had started their performance last night. And spent the next hour and 13 minutes preparing for what would either be the most satisfying moment of my professional life or a spectacular act of career suicide. Honestly, I was fine with either outcome at this point. The conference room on the third floor was our biggest one, the kind with a long mahogany table that was supposed to make us look successful and a projector screen that we used for PowerPoint presentations that nobody ever actually paid attention to. I'd booked it for the entire morning, locked the door behind me, and started setting up my laptop like I was preparing a TED Talk on the subject of how to destroy your cheating wife's life in 20 minutes or less. Getting the video file ready was easier than I expected. Victor's security system had this convenient export feature that let you save clips directly to your hard drive. I'd already downloaded last night's highlight reel, all 4 minutes and 37 seconds of it, and loaded it into the presentation software. The thumbnail image was paused on a particularly damning moment. Lydia sitting in my office chair with Damien's hands on her shoulders, both of them smiling like they'd just won the lottery instead of destroying a marriage. I titled the presentation Company Ethics and Workplace Conduct Review because I'm petty and also because the irony was too perfect to resist. At 9:52, people started arriving. First was Richard, my business partner, looking confused because I hadn't given him any heads up about this meeting. Richard was a good guy, late 40s, sensible, the kind of person who actually read the employee handbook and remembered birthdays. He'd been instrumental in building Harper and Holt into what it was today, and I felt genuinely bad that he was about to witness what I was about to do. "Graham, what's this about?" he asked, settling into a chair near the head of the table. "Your email just said mandatory attendance. Is everything okay?" "Define okay," I said, which probably should have been his first warning sign that this wasn't a normal meeting. Next came Dale from accounting, then Jennifer from marketing, then the rest of the management team, about 12 people total, all looking varying degrees of confused and concerned. Sarah from operations actually brought her coffee and a notepad, ready to take minutes like this was a legitimate business meeting and not a public execution. At 9:58, Lydia walked in, still looking polished and professional in her charcoal dress, completely unaware that she was about to become the star of a screening she definitely hadn't auditioned for. She caught my eye and smiled, then took a seat in the middle of the table like she belonged there, like she hadn't spent last night doing things that would violate at least 7 company policies. "Morning, everyone," she said brightly. "Graham, I have that HR orientation at 10:30, so if we could keep this under 30 minutes, that would be great." "Oh, don't worry," I said, and my smile probably looked slightly unhinged because Richard gave me a weird look. "This won't take long at all." At 10:01, Damien rushed in looking apologetic, carrying Lydia's coffee from that expensive place on 5th. He handed it to her with a quick, "Sorry I'm late," that made my eye twitch again, then took a seat right next to her because apparently they weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. I waited until 10:03 to make sure everyone had arrived, then stood up and moved to the front of the room where the projector screen hung on the wall like a blank canvas waiting to become a crime scene. "Thanks for coming on short notice," I started, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. "I know you're all busy, so I'll get right to the point. We're here to discuss company ethics and workplace conduct." A few people exchanged glances. Jennifer from marketing looked suspicious. She was sharp, probably already sensing that something was off. Dale looked bored, which was his default expression for any meeting that didn't involve spreadsheets. Lydia looked calm, maybe even slightly annoyed that I was taking up her valuable time with something as mundane as ethics. "As you all know," I continued, "we've had some security camera issues over the past few weeks. Cameras were down, footage wasn't being recorded, and honestly, it created a bit of a security concern." Lydia shifted in her seat. Just slightly, but I noticed. She was probably wondering where this was going, maybe starting to feel that little tingle of worry that people get when they realize they might have made a catastrophic mistake. "Well, I'm happy to report that the cameras are now fully operational," I said, and I saw Lydia's face go just a shade paler. "In fact, they've been operational for about 3 weeks now. Crystal clear HD footage, night vision, motion detection, the works. Our technician, Victor, did an amazing job." The room was quiet. People were nodding politely, probably wondering why I'd called an emergency meeting to discuss security cameras. Richard was looking at me like he was trying to figure out if I'd had a mental breakdown. He wasn't wrong. "Now, the interesting thing about having functioning security cameras," I continued, moving toward my laptop, "is that you get to see what really happens in the office after hours. Who's working late, who's dedicated to their job, who's using company property for, let's call them non-work-related activities." Lydia's hand, the one holding her expensive latte, started trembling. Just a little. Just enough that coffee sloshed dangerously close to the rim of the cup. Damien, meanwhile, had gone completely still, like a rabbit that just spotted a wolf and was hoping immobility would somehow save it. "So I thought," I said, reaching for the laptop, "that we should all watch some of this footage together. You know, as a team, really get a sense of what's happening in our workplace when we think nobody's watching." "Graham," Lydia said, and her voice had this edge to it that I'd heard before, usually right before she told me I was being unreasonable about something. "I'm not sure this is." "Oh, I'm very sure," I interrupted, and I clicked the mouse. The projector hummed to life, and suddenly there it was, displayed on a 6-foot screen for everyone to see. My office, last night, 8:47 p.m., starring Lydia Cole and Damien Foster in a production I was now calling Reasons I'm Filing for Divorce. The silence in that room was spectacular. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a bomb goes off, or right after someone's world completely shatters. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. We all just watched as on-screen Lydia laughed at something on-screen Damien said, as he put his hands on her shoulders, as she reached up and touched his hand with hers. "Jesus Christ," Richard whispered, and I'd never heard him curse in the 7 years I'd known him. I let it play for maybe 15 seconds, just enough to establish what was happening, just enough to remove any possibility of misinterpretation, but not so long that we crossed into territory that would require an HR investigation. Then I paused it, right on that moment where Lydia was standing and Damien was pulling her closer. "So," I said, turning to face the room, "let's talk about company ethics." Lydia had gone from pale to completely white, like someone had drained all the blood from her face and replaced it with pure panic. She tried to stand, but her legs apparently weren't cooperating. You can't. This is a violation of privacy. I finished for her. Actually, no. These cameras are legally installed on company property, in company spaces, and according to our employee handbook, which you wrote, Lydia, so you should know this. All areas of the building except bathrooms and changing rooms are subject to surveillance. Page 47, Section 12, Subsection C. I checked this morning. Damien looked like he was about to throw up, which was honestly the most relatable thing he'd done all day. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish trying to figure out how to breathe on land. Is this? Jennifer from marketing started, then stopped, probably realizing there was no polite way to finish that question. Is this my wife having an affair with my personal assistant in my office? I supplied helpfully. Yes it is. Glad we're all on the same page. Dale from accounting, God bless him, actually pulled out his phone and started taking notes like this was a normal meeting and he was documenting action items. Should I be recording this in the minutes? He asked seriously. Absolutely, I said. Mark it down as major breach of company ethics policies and reasons the HR director will be updating her resume. Lydia finally found her voice, and it came out sharp and defensive, exactly like I knew it would. You had no right to show this. You're making a scene. This is unprofessional and unprofessional. I laughed, and it sounded slightly unhinged even to my own ears. Lady, you turned my assistant into an unpaid actor in our marriage's sequel, and you're calling me unprofessional? I'm not the one who used late HR meeting as code for hookup session in my husband's office. Sarah from operations, bless her heart, actually clapped. Just once, quickly, before catching herself and looking embarrassed. But I saw it, and honestly, it made me feel slightly better about the whole situation. Graham, Richard said carefully, standing up like he was approaching a wild animal. Maybe we should discuss this privately, not in front of the entire management team. Why? I asked genuinely. They were going to find out eventually. Might as well rip the Band-Aid off now. Plus, Lydia's always talking about transparency and leadership. Consider this my contribution to transparent management practices. Lydia stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Her face had gone from white to red, anger finally overtaking the panic. You're being childish. You're embarrassing yourself. You're embarrassing all of us. Oh, I'm embarrassing? I gestured to the paused screen. I'm not the one who got caught on camera treating company furniture like a prop in my personal life drama. That's all you, sweetheart. Damien finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant. Save it. I cut him off. Your apology means about as much as your employee loyalty, which is apparently worth less than whatever my wife was offering you for participating in this little arrangement. The room had devolved into chaos now. People were whispering to each other. Some were staring at Lydia and Damien like they'd grown extra heads, and Richard was standing there looking like he'd just watched his entire company implode in real time. Which, to be fair, he kind of had. The beautiful thing about publicly detonating someone's life is watching them scramble to pick up the pieces while everyone else just stares. It's like witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Except the car is your marriage and the crash is happening in a conference room with fluorescent lighting and stale bagels that nobody's touching because they're too busy watching the show. Lydia was standing now, gripping the edge of the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright, her face cycling through emotions faster than a slot machine. Shock, anger, humiliation, more anger, then landing on what I can only describe as desperate damage control mode. This is a misunderstanding, she said, and I had to give her credit for trying. Her voice was shaking, but she was going for authoritative, like if she just said it confidently enough, everyone would forget what they'd just witnessed on a 6-foot screen in high definition. That footage, it's taken out of context. Damien and I were discussing. Discussing what exactly? I interrupted, because I wasn't about to let her spin this into some kind of innocent misunderstanding. Ergonomic office chair positions? The best techniques for team building? How to completely destroy someone's trust while maintaining excellent posture. Jennifer from marketing let out a snort that she tried to cover with a cough. She failed. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gunshot, and I saw at least 3 other people fighting smiles. This was terrible. This was a corporate nightmare. This was also, apparently, the most entertaining thing that had happened at Harper and Holt Consulting since Gerald from IT accidentally replied all to a company email with a cat meme. Graham, Lydia said, and her voice had gone from authoritative to pleading, which was a tone I'd heard before, but never in front of 12 witnesses. Can we please discuss this privately? This doesn't need to be public. I finished. You're right. It didn't need to be public. But then again, your affair didn't need to happen in my office, on company time, using company furniture. So I guess we're both making questionable choices today. Damien had his head in his hands now, and I almost felt bad for him. Almost. He was 26 years old, fresh out of business school, probably thought he was being so clever sneaking around with the boss's wife. Never occurred to him that security cameras might actually work, or that his boss might not be as oblivious as he looked. Youth is wasted on the stupid, as they say. Lydia started again, then stopped, her brain apparently short-circuiting as it tried to find a way out of this that didn't exist. You weren't supposed to see that. The room went even quieter, which I didn't think was possible. That's the thing about the truth. Sometimes it just slips out when you're panicking, and suddenly everyone knows exactly what you meant to keep hidden. Well, no kidding, I said, and I couldn't keep the sarcasm out of my voice if I tried. I wasn't supposed to see that. I also wasn't supposed to find out my wife was cheating on me, and I definitely wasn't supposed to discover that my personal assistant was moonlighting as my marriage counselor's worst nightmare. But here we are, living in a world where security cameras work and Victor does excellent installations. Richard cleared his throat, which is what Richard did when he was uncomfortable and trying to be diplomatic. Graham, I think maybe we should adjourn this meeting and what? I turned to him, and I could feel 7 years of partnership in my voice. Pretend this didn't happen? Go back to our offices and act like everything's normal? Richard, my wife just got caught on camera having an affair with my assistant in my office. There is no, and that makes this better. The meeting happened. The footage exists. We're all standing here in this room together, and we all saw the same thing. I was comforting him, Lydia said suddenly, desperately, like she'd just found a life raft in the middle of the ocean. Damien was going through a difficult time. He was stressed about his performance review, and I was helping him. Oh my God, I said, and I actually laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had officially run out of patience for bullshit. You're really going with that? You were comforting him? With aromatherapy and full contact hugs? Is that what we're calling it now? Sarah from operations had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. Dale was still taking notes on his phone, because apparently nothing, not even watching his co-worker's marriage implode, was going to stop him from documenting this meeting. Jennifer looked like she was watching her favorite reality TV show, completely invested in every moment. It was a mistake, Damien said quietly, still not looking up from his hands. It was stupid. It shouldn't have happened. You're right, I agreed. It shouldn't have happened. A lot of things shouldn't have happened. I shouldn't have trusted you to organize my schedule while you were apparently also organizing private meetings with my wife. I shouldn't have given you a Christmas bonus last year. I shouldn't have recommended you for that training program in Portland. But mostly, you shouldn't have slept with my wife in my office like you were starring in the world's worst porno. Graham, Lydia snapped, and there was the anger I'd been waiting for. The real Lydia, the one who showed up when things didn't go her way. You're being immature. You're being vindictive. This whole display is beneath you. Immature, I repeated, and I felt something shift inside me, from anger to something colder and clearer. You know what's immature, Lydia? Having an affair with your husband's assistant. You know what's vindictive? Lying about late meetings while you're using his office as your personal love nest. And you know what's beneath me? Apparently, being married to someone who thinks HR meeting is code for horizontal refreshments. Richard made a strangled sound. I think it might have been a suppressed laugh, but he covered it well. I want to leave, Lydia said, moving toward the door. I'm not staying here to be humiliated. Too late, I said cheerfully. The humiliation already happened. You're standing in a room full of your colleagues after they just watched footage of you cheating on your husband. You can leave, but the humiliation's coming with you. It's like a party favor, except instead of a little bag of mints, you get to carry around the knowledge that everyone here knows exactly what kind of person you are. She stopped at the door, her hand on the handle, and turned back to look at me. For a second, just a second, I saw something in her face that might have been genuine remorse. Or maybe it was just more panic. I honestly couldn't tell anymore, and I wasn't sure I cared. "You're going to regret this," she said quietly. "Probably," I agreed. "But right now?" "Right now I regret marrying you more." She left. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the framed motivational posters on the wall, and suddenly there were only 11 people in the room instead of 12. Damien looked like he wanted to follow her, but couldn't quite figure out how to make his legs work. "Damien," I said, and my voice was surprisingly calm considering I'd just publicly destroyed 2 people's reputations in under 20 minutes. "You should probably start updating your resume." "Am I fired?" he asked, finally looking up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What do you think?" I replied, "You violated about 7 different company policies, destroyed any possibility of a professional working relationship, and oh yeah, slept with your boss's wife. So yes, Damien, consider yourself very, very fired." He stood up slowly, like an old man instead of a 26-year-old who'd just learned that actions have consequences. "I really am sorry," he said again. "I know," I said, and I meant it. But sorry doesn't unfuck my wife, does it? Sorry doesn't undo the past 8 months of lies. Sorry is just a word people say when they get caught doing something they knew was wrong the whole time. He left too, less dramatically than Lydia, but with the same defeated slouch. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, and then it was just me and the rest of the management team, all of us standing in this conference room that suddenly felt too small and too large at the same time. "Well," Jennifer said after a long moment of silence, "that was the most interesting team meeting we've ever had. Should I mark this as a recurring event?" Dale asked seriously, his phone still out. "Like, do we need to schedule follow-ups?" I laughed. I actually laughed, because what else was there to do? My marriage was over, my assistant was fired, and I'd just committed what could generously be called career arson in front of my entire management team. "No follow-ups needed, Dale," I said. "I think we covered everything." Richard walked over and put his hand on my shoulder, which was the most physical affection he'd shown in 7 years of partnership. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "No," I said honestly. "But I will be. Eventually. After therapy. And probably a lot of bourbon." "You want me to handle the paperwork?" he offered. "For Damien's termination, I mean. And whatever needs to happen with Lydia." "That would be great," I said, suddenly feeling exhausted like I'd run a marathon, except the marathon was emotional devastation and the finish line was alcoholism. "I need to call my lawyer. And maybe my therapist. Possibly both at the same time." Sarah stood up and started gathering her things, then paused. "For what it's worth, Graham, I think you handled that with remarkable restraint." I would have thrown the laptop at them. "The day's not over yet," I replied, and several people laughed, which felt surreal but also somehow exactly right. As everyone filed out, offering various versions of, "I'm sorry this happened," and "let us know if you need anything." I stood there in the empty conference room with my laptop still connected to the projector, the paused image of my wife's betrayal still displayed on the screen like modern art titled, "The Exact Moment Everything Fell Apart." I closed the laptop, disconnected the cables, and looked around the room one more time. "Well, Victor," I said to no one, "your cameras work great. Maybe a little too great. But thanks anyway." Then I walked out, leaving the conference room and whatever remained of my old life behind me. By the time I made it back to my office, my phone had already exploded with 17 text messages, 6 missed calls, and what I can only assume were the digital equivalent of people grabbing popcorn and settling in for the drama. News traveled fast in a mid-sized consulting firm, apparently faster than the speed of light and definitely faster than my ability to process what I'd just done. I ignored all of it. The messages, the calls, the probably well-meaning but ultimately useless attempts at comfort from coworkers who 30 minutes ago didn't know my life was a dumpster fire. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Nora Stein, attorney at law, and the only person I knew who could turn betrayal into legally binding paperwork. Nora and I went way back. College, actually, where she'd been the terrifyingly competent president of the mock trial team, and I'd been the business major who occasionally showed up to meetings. We'd stayed in touch over the years, mostly through LinkedIn and the occasional happy hour where she'd tell war stories about contentious divorces and custody battles that made my problems seem quaint. Well, they weren't quaint anymore. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Graham Cole, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. This is either a social call, which you never make during work hours, or you need a lawyer, which means something interesting happened. I'm betting on option 2. Nora, I said, sinking into my office chair. The same chair Lydia had been sitting in last night while Damien worked his magic or whatever the hell they were doing. I made a mental note to burn this chair later. How fast can we turn betrayal into paperwork? There was a pause. Then I heard the distinctive sound of a door closing. When Nora spoke again, her voice had shifted from friendly to business mode, which was exactly what I needed. Faster than your wife can delete her emails. What happened? I gave her the abbreviated version. Security cameras, surprise footage, office affair, public confrontation in a conference room with witnesses. I left out some of the more colorful language I'd used and definitely didn't mention the part where Sarah from operations had clapped, but I gave her the essentials. Nora listened without interrupting, which was one of her many talents, and when I finished, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Do you still have the footage? She asked. Saved on my laptop, backed up to the cloud, and probably burned into my retinas for the rest of my natural life, I confirmed. Perfect. Email it to me using my secure portal. I'll send you the link. How long have you been married? 7 years. No kids, thank God. Assets. Joint ownership of the company, the house in Queen End, 2 cars, retirement accounts, savings. We have a prenup, but it's pretty basic. Mostly just protects the company in case of dissolution. I heard typing on her end. Nora was already working, already building the case before I'd even officially hired her. This is why I loved her in a purely professional, please destroy my cheating wife's life kind of way. Okay, here's what we're going to do, she said, and I could practically hear her brain organizing everything into neat little legal boxes. I'm going to draft divorce papers today. I can have them ready by tonight. We'll cite adultery, which thanks to your video evidence will be stupidly easy to prove. Washington is a no-fault state, but having documented proof of infidelity helps with everything else. Asset division, spousal support if she tries to claim it, and general leverage. She's going to fight this, I said, stating the obvious. Lydia doesn't lose gracefully. Neither do I, Nora replied, and I believed her. Now the company. You said you're co-owners? With my business partner Richard Harper. It's split 3 ways. Richard has 40%, Lydia and I each have 30%. That's going to be complicated. She can't force a sale, but she can make things messy. However, if we can prove she violated company ethics policies, which it sounds like she definitely did, we might be able to leverage that into a buyout situation. Does your company have a morality clause in the ownership agreement? I pulled up the partnership documents on my computer, scanning through pages of legal jargon that I'd signed 7 years ago without really reading because I trusted everyone involved. Hindsight was 20/20, and apparently I'd been operating with cataracts. Section 8, subsection 4. I read aloud. Any partner found to be in violation of company ethics policies or engaged in conduct detrimental to the company's reputation may be subject to forced buyout at fair market value, as determined by an independent assessor. Beautiful, Nora said, and she sounded genuinely delighted. That's beautiful. We can use that. The affair happened on company property, during company time, and you have video evidence. Plus, you just showed that evidence to your entire management team, which means there are witnesses to her ethics violation. She's going to have a hell of a time arguing her way out of this. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not quite relief, but close enough. For the first time since watching that video this morning, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely drowning. What about Damien? I asked. I fired him in front of everyone. Can he sue for wrongful termination? Nora laughed, which was not the reaction I expected. Let him try. You have video evidence of him engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a superior on company property. That's grounds for termination in any employee handbook I've ever seen. Plus, if he's stupid enough to sue, we'll countersue for about 17 different things and make his life so miserable he'll wish he'd just accepted the firing and moved on. You're enjoying this, I observed. I'm enjoying the legal aspects of it, she corrected. The fact that you're going through hell right now? That part sucks, and I'm sorry. But professionally speaking, this is a lawyer's dream case. Clear evidence, multiple witnesses, documented violations, and a prenup that already establishes asset protection. Graham, I could win this case in my sleep. So what happens now? Now, you send me everything. The video, copies of your ownership documents, employment contracts for both Lydia and Damien, any financial records you have access to. I'll draft the divorce papers and have a process server deliver them tonight. Where does she stay when she's not at your place? We have the house together. I don't know where she'll go after what happened today. Not your problem, Nora said firmly. In fact, I'd recommend you go home right now, pack up her essentials, and have them ready by the door. She can collect them and find somewhere else to stay. You're not obligated to house someone who betrayed you. That seems harsh, I said, though I wasn't sure why I was defending Lydia at this point. Force of habit, probably. Graham, she cheated on you in your office. Harsh is relative. Now, I'm also going to recommend we freeze joint accounts. Not empty them. Just freeze them so neither of you can drain the funds during the divorce proceedings. It's standard procedure. Do it, I said, surprising myself with how quickly I agreed. 3 hours ago, I was a married man with a stable life and a successful business. Now I was apparently the kind of person who froze bank accounts and kicked his wife out of the house. Personal growth was weird. Good. I'll file the necessary paperwork with the court today. We'll also request a temporary restraining order preventing her from accessing certain company files and systems until we can sort out the ownership situation. Can we do that? We can do a lot of things when there's video evidence of ethical violations. Trust me on this. Oh, and Graham, stop talking to her. No texts, no calls, no in-person conversations. Everything goes through me now. If she tries to contact you, ignore it or document it and send it to me. The less direct communication you have, the better. I thought about all the years we'd been together, all the conversations we'd had, all the plans we'd made. And now we were reducing it to no contact and legal documentation. It felt surreal, like I was watching my life happen to someone else. Nora, how long does this usually take? The divorce, I mean. With your evidence and a good strategy? We could have preliminary hearings within a month, settlement negotiations within 2 or 3 months. If she's smart, she'll settle quickly and avoid dragging this out. If she's stupid and vindictive, she'll fight it, and we'll destroy her in court while billing her for the privilege. And the company? That's trickier. The buyout could take 6 months to a year, depending on how complicated the valuation gets. But we'll work on getting her removed from day-to-day operations immediately. She's a liability now, and Richard will understand that. I heard clicking on her end. Probably her assistant or maybe just Nora herself, already pulling up documents and preparing for battle. The woman was a machine, a caffeine-powered legal weapon that I was incredibly grateful to have on my side. Okay, I said, feeling more exhausted than I'd ever felt in my life. Let's do this. One more thing, Nora said, and her voice softened slightly. How are you doing? Like, actually doing. It was the first time anyone had asked that question since this morning, and I wasn't prepared for how much it would hit me. I looked around my office, the same office where Lydia had betrayed me, where I'd spent countless hours building a business and a life that had apparently been built on lies. I'm furious, I admitted. I'm humiliated. I feel like an idiot for not seeing this coming. And I'm terrified that this is going to destroy everything I've built. It won't, Nora said with certainty. You'll get through this. It's going to suck for a while. It's going to suck a lot, actually. But you'll get through it. And when you do, you'll have a company that's yours, a life that's yours, and the satisfaction of knowing that you handled this with more grace than most people would have. I publicly humiliated my wife in front of the entire management team, I pointed out. After she privately humiliated you in your own office, Nora countered. Context matters. Now send me those files, go home, pack up her stuff, and try to eat something that isn't coffee or rage. I'll call you tonight with an update. Thanks, Nora. Seriously, that's what I'm here for. Oh, and Graham, welcome to the next chapter of your life. It starts with paperwork and ends with freedom. Let's get to work. She hung up, and I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone. Then I opened my laptop, logged into the secure portal she'd just sent me, and started uploading files. The video, the ownership documents, employment contracts, financial records, everything that would help Nora build the case that would dismantle my marriage and hopefully save my company. By midnight, the divorce papers were drafted. By morning, Lydia's access to company systems was revoked. By noon the next day, Damien's ID badge was deactivated and his desk was empty. Nora had called it legal lightning, and she wasn't wrong. In less than 24 hours, we'd gone from evidence to action, from betrayal to battle stations. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was going to survive this. The next morning arrived with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the face, which was appropriate considering my life had become a demolition site. I'd spent the previous night at a hotel because going home to the house I shared with Lydia felt about as appealing as diving into a shark tank wearing a meat suit. The hotel was one of those corporate chains that all look the same. Beige walls, generic art, a bed that somehow managed to be both too soft and too hard at the same time. I'd ordered room service, drank 2 bottles of overpriced wine from the minibar, and fell asleep watching a documentary about financial fraud that hit way too close to home. When I walked into the office at 7:30, the energy was different. People were already there, way more people than should have been there that early. And they all suddenly found their shoes incredibly interesting the moment I stepped off the elevator. Word had spread, obviously. In a company of 45 employees, a public affair revelation travels faster than a viral cat video. And by now, everyone from the interns to the janitorial staff probably knew that the HR director had been playing horizontal tag with the boss's assistant. I made it to my office without making eye contact with anyone, which was a feat of social avoidance that deserved an award. My coffee from the hotel was already cold, my head was pounding from the wine, and I had 17 new emails waiting for me, most of them with subject lines that made me want to fake my own death and move to a country without extradition treaties. At 8:15, Lydia arrived. I heard her before I saw her, the distinctive click of her expensive heels on the tile floor, moving fast like she was on a mission. She went straight to her office on the 2nd floor, and I watched through my window as she tried her keycard on the door. Once, twice, 3 times, each swipe getting more aggressive, like she could force the technology to cooperate through sheer willpower. The light blinked red every single time. I'd had IT revoke her access last night at Nora's recommendation. Her keycard was now about as useful as a library card at a car dealership, decorative, but ultimately pointless. From my vantage point 3 floors up, I could see her face cycle through confusion, then disbelief, then pure rage as she realized what had happened. She pulled out her phone, probably calling IT, probably about to unleash hell on some poor technician who was just following orders. I almost felt bad for whoever answered that call. Almost. 10 minutes later, she was in the lobby, and I could hear her screaming from 3 floors up. The acoustics in our building were terrible, which meant every word echoed through the stairwell, like she was using a megaphone specifically designed to broadcast humiliation. "There's been a mistake," she shouted at someone, probably Rebecca from reception, who definitely didn't get paid enough to deal with this. "My keycard isn't working. I need access to my office immediately." I grabbed my now cold coffee and walked to the elevator, because if I was going to watch this train wreck, I might as well have a front row seat. By the time I got to the lobby, there was a small crowd gathering. Employees pretending to check the bulletin board or grab coffee from the cafe, but really just watching the show because humans are fundamentally terrible and we all love drama when it's not happening to us. Lydia saw me the moment I stepped off the elevator, and her eyes locked onto mine like a heat-seeking missile that had just found its target. "Graham," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What is going on? Why isn't my keycard working? Why can't I access my email?" I took a sip of my cold coffee, realized it tasted like regret and bad decisions, and gave her the most casual shrug I could manage. "System updates," I said simply. "You know how IT is. Always tinkering with things." Her face went from red to purple, which was a color I didn't know human skin could achieve without medical intervention. "Don't play games with me. You did this. You locked me out." "Me?" I put my hand to my chest in mock surprise. "Lydia, I'm just a humble co-owner trying to run a business. These kinds of technical decisions are way above my pay grade." "This is illegal," she hissed, moving closer, but apparently remembering we had an audience because she stopped about 5 feet away. "You can't just lock me out of my own office. I have rights. I'm a partner in this company." "Had rights," I corrected pleasantly. Past tense. "See, there's this interesting clause in our partnership agreement, Section 8, subsection 4, if you want to look it up. Says something about partners who violate company ethics policies being subject to," what was the phrase? "Oh right, immediate suspension of access pending investigation." There's no investigation, she practically shrieked. Sure there is, I said. We're investigating whether using company property for personal affairs, emphasis on affairs, constitutes an ethics violation. Spoiler alert, it does. Page 47 of the employee handbook that you wrote. The irony is really not lost on me, by the way. Gerald from IT had appeared from somewhere, looking uncomfortable in that way IT people do when forced to interact with human emotion. Ms. Cole, he said quietly, I've been instructed to revoke your system access until further notice. It's temporary, pending. Pending what? Lydia snapped at him, and Gerald actually took a step back. Pending my husband's temper tantrum? This is ridiculous. This is policy, I interrupted, and my voice was colder than I'd intended. You violated company ethics. You used my office for activities that definitely weren't in your job description. And now there are consequences. Novel concept, I know, but that's how the real world works. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her brain working, trying to find an angle, a way to spin this, anything that would give her back control. But there was nothing. The evidence existed. The witnesses existed. Her affair was documented in 4K resolution, and no amount of spin could change that. You're going to regret this, she said finally, her voice dropping to something cold and threatening. When my lawyer gets through with you. Your lawyer can talk to my lawyer, I said, pulling out my phone and holding it up. Nora Stein. I'll text you her number. You two should get acquainted since you'll be spending a lot of time together over the next few months. I walked past her toward the elevator, done with this conversation and done with her. As I pressed the button, I heard her say one more thing, quieter now, almost desperate. I didn't mean for this to happen. I turned back and looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd made choices and was now facing the fallout. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy. That part was quickly overruled by the rest of me that remembered watching her betray our marriage in my own office. Yeah, I said. You just meant not to get caught. The elevator doors closed, and I rode back up to my office alone. 2 weeks later, I got a call from a journalist who'd somehow gotten my personal number, which was either impressive investigative work or a massive breach of privacy. Probably both. Mr. Cole, she said, I'm calling about the footage that's trending on social media. Do you have any comment? I nearly dropped my phone. I'm sorry, what footage? The security camera video. It's all over Twitter. Someone leaked it. My stomach dropped faster than my faith in humanity. I pulled up Twitter on my laptop, and there it was, my marriage's destruction, now with over 2 million views and climbing. Someone had edited it down to the highlights, added dramatic music, and titled it, HR Gone Wild, When Office Romance Goes Too Far. The comments were exactly what you'd expect, a mix of sympathy, mockery, and people making popcorn gifs. Someone had even created a hashtag cameras don't lie. Any comment? The journalist asked again. I stared at the screen, watching the view count tick upward. Yes, I said finally. I always said our office was built on transparency. Guess I was more right than I knew. Months later, I sat in my new office. Same building, same floor, completely different locks and a chair I'd picked out myself because the old one had way too much emotional baggage and questionable stains that I didn't want to think about. The divorce had finalized 3 weeks ago after Lydia tried every legal maneuver in the book and discovered that video evidence beats creative lawyers every single time. Nora had been ruthless, efficient, and worth every penny of her frankly astronomical hourly rate. I got the house. I got 70% of the liquid assets. Most importantly, I got Lydia's 30% stake in the company for a buyout price that made Richard whistle low and say, "Damn, Graham. Remind me never to piss off your lawyer." The morality clause had worked exactly like Nora said it would, and now Harper and Holt Consulting was mine and Richard's, split 60-40, with no HR director who moonlighted as a homewrecker. Sometimes, late at night when the office was empty and I couldn't sleep, I still pulled up that footage. Not because I enjoyed the pain. I'd had enough therapy to know that was unhealthy, but because it reminded me of something important. Every betrayal teaches you something if you're willing to learn. Mine taught me that trust needs to be earned, that security cameras are worth their weight in gold, and that late meetings should always come with verifiable meeting notes. Lydia had gone into hiding after the footage went viral, deleting all her social media and apparently moving to Portland or Phoenix or somewhere that started with P and wasn't Seattle. I heard through the office gossip chain, because some things never change, that she'd taken a job at a small firm doing HR consulting, which seemed like a spectacularly bad career choice for someone whose face was permanently associated with workplace ethics violations. Damien had sent me a Christmas card last month. Just a generic one from Hallmark that said, "Wishing you peace and happiness," with a handwritten note inside. No hard feelings. I've learned from my mistakes. I'd replied by mailing him a USB drive in a padded envelope with a label that read, "Never forget," and nothing else. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying. More than it should have been. These days I started every morning the same way. Coffee, confidence, and a quick check of the security camera feeds, because once you've been burned, you learn to appreciate good surveillance. The cameras were always rolling now, capturing everything in perfect HD clarity. Because in life and in business, the moment you stop watching is the moment someone decides to audition for the wrong role.